Welcome to today's deep dive. We are really so glad to have you with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining us.
To start things off today, I want you to just take a second and try to picture something in your mind.
Set the scene for us.
Right. Imagine you are standing on the gritty, neon-lit streets of 1980s Paris.
Mm-hmm.
You can feel the cold concrete, you can hear the hum of the city, and there's this absolute tension in the air of the outer suburbs.
A very specific vibe.
Exactly. Now, suddenly, transport yourself south. You are completely immersed in the vibrant, sun-drenched coastal energy of Marseille.
Totally different world.
You can smell the salt water, feel the Mediterranean breeze, and you hear a completely different rhythm beating through the neighborhoods.
Yeah.
We are setting the scene here because today we're going on a journey through the evolution of a sound that, well, it didn't just entertain, it completely shook the foundations of French culture.
It really is an incredible journey. I
Yes.
mean, we're looking at how a completely foreign musical import landed on French soil.
Mm.
And it didn't just get copied.
It got entirely reinvented, weaponized, and turned into this massive cultural megaphone.
Our source for this deep dive is a fantastic, highly comprehensive column from the music culture platform MMR.
Monumental Movement Record.
Yes, Monumental Movement Records. And it details the complete history of French hip-hop, from its absolute earliest days all the way up to the massive digital landscape of the modern era.
That's a really deep text.
It is. And our mission today is to explore exactly how this American import transformed. How did it become this powerful, distinct voice for France's marginalized youth, and then eventually explode into a global phenomenon?
Yeah, the timeline is wild.
Okay, let's unpack this by going right back to the beginning,
Yeah.
the spark.
Right, the very beginning.
The column points to 1984 as the year this really took root. But I have to ask, was this an organic cultural exchange? Or were there like commercial forces pushing it across the Atlantic even back then?
Oh, it was incredibly organic. You have to picture the landscape in 1984.
Pre-internet.
Exactly, pre-internet. The infrastructure for globalized music distribution just wasn't there yet. This was a hyper-localized culture. The raw energy of it traveled through bootleg tapes, word of mouth, and just a few key cultural exchanges.
Wow.
And it found incredibly fertile ground in the urban spaces of France, particularly in Paris. But it definitely wasn't a top-down industry push. It was a purely bottom-up street movement.
The imagery from this era in the source is just so vivid. We're talking about DJs spinning these raw break beats in underground Parisian clubs.
Yeah.
You had B-boys and B-girls taking over public parks and squares to break dance. They were creating these totally spontaneous arenas of competition and expression.
And the visual art, too.
Right. Graffiti started popping up across urban spaces, physically transforming the visual landscape of the city. But at this stage, it was still just a minor underground street culture.
It wasn't on the radio.
No, not at all. It wasn't mainstream, which is actually a crucial phase for any cultural movement. When we look at the origins of massive artistic shifts, music almost always starts as this highly localized form of self-expression before it evolves into something bigger.
It needs that incubation.
Precisely. These early adopters in 1984, the kids spinning records and painting trains, they were essentially laying the groundwork.
Building the foundation.
Yes, they were building the physical and cultural infrastructure. You really need that underground incubation period where artists are just doing it for themselves, doing it for their immediate peers,
Figuring it out as they go.
figuring out the mechanics of the art form. The cadence, the slang, the rhythm, all of that has to happen long before it can be used to carry heavier societal messages.
That brings up a great point about the timeline. They had to figure out how to make the sound their own before they could really say something with it.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the moment the broadcast really began. We are moving into the late 1980s, specifically the pivotal year of 1989.
A huge year.
Massive. The source points to 1989 as the birth year of the two most foundational, legendary groups in the entire history of French hip-hop.
The heavyweights.
We are talking about the tale of two cities here. On one side, you have Paris, and on the other, you have Marseille.
Two entirely different approaches.
Let's start with Paris. The group is Suprême NTM. What was their specific contribution to this new foundation?
NTM is absolutely central to the DNA of French hip-hop. They were formed in the Paris suburbs, specifically an area called Saint-Saint-Denis, which is a detail that matters immensely.
Why is that?
Because this was an area characterized by high-density housing projects, severe economic struggle, and a deep, pervasive sense of isolation from the glittering, wealthy center of Paris.
They were physically and culturally cut off.
Right. And they were led by their frontman Joey Starr, alongside Cool Shen.
And from what I understand from the column, their style was completely unapologetic.
Oh, completely.
They didn't polish anything for the mainstream ear. Their beats were aggressive, and their lyrics were heavily political, packed with raw social critique.
They were holding up a mirror to the harsh realities of suburban Parisian life.
They were the unfiltered voice of the banlieues.
They really were. But then, in that exact same year, 1989, down in the south of France, a completely different approach was being born.
Enter the group IAM.
Formed in Marseille.
Mm-hmm.
This was a brilliant collective of minds. You had Akhenaten, Shuriken, Cheops, Imhotep, and Freeman.
The contrast between NTM and IAM is what I find so compelling here.
It's night and day.
Where NTM was immediate and aggressive, IAM was famously philosophical. They tackled complex social issues, but they did it through this incredibly unique lens of ancient Egypt and French colonial history.
Yeah.
They were weaving these massive historical epics into their rhymes to talk about the present day. How does that dichotomy actually work in building a cohesive national genre?
What's fascinating here is how perfectly these two groups represent the different ways that music and really art in general can process and express societal tension.
Okay, break that down.
You have NTM, right? They are processing the frustration of the Paris suburbs through visceral, immediate political critique. It is the sound of the streets right this very second.
A gut punch.
Yes. Then you have IAM, who are processing their environment through deep historical reflection. They're looking at the present struggles in Marseille and connecting them to centuries of human history, empires, colonialism, lineage.
Wow.
Both are tackling the reality of being marginalized in France. But one acts like a gritty, handheld documentary camera, while the other acts like a sweeping, profound historical novel.
I really like that framing. A documentary camera versus a historical novel, they are telling the exact same story of alienation, but the methodology is totally different.
And it worked beautifully.
It did, and this dual foundation sets the stage for the 1990s, which the source explicitly calls the Golden Age.
The era of masterpieces.
Right. This is when the social awareness of the movement really deepens, and we get these monumental albums.
The 90s are when that incubation period we talked about fully pays off.
Mm-hmm.
The scene just explodes with creative maturity. Let's look at NTM's evolution first.
Let's do it.
In 1993, they released the album Suprême NTM. This record is an unflinching depiction of the realities in the Paris suburbs. It directly tackled urban violence, severe clashes with the police, and the everyday grinding struggles of immigrant communities in France.
And they pushed it even further 2 years later.
They did.
In 1995, NTM released Paris sous les bombes. This album doubled down on the political messaging and heavily reflected the youth culture of the Saint-Denis district.
Very uncompromising.
It was uncompromising in its critique of the French state and law enforcement. Now, I just want to pause for a second here.
Sure.
It's really important to note for you listening that our goal today is to act as your impartial guides through this history.
Absolutely.
The source material we are diving into highlights these highly politically charged anti-establishment and anti-police themes because they are the factual historical reality of what these artists were writing about.
Right, it's the historical record.
We are relaying the contents and context of these monumental albums to understand the movement. We are not endorsing the specific political viewpoints of the artists themselves. We are just looking at the history.
That is a vital piece of context. Our role is to understand the historical impact and the sociology of the music.
Exactly.
And the impact of these albums was undeniable. They were lightning rods. But to balance the narrative, we also have to look at what IAM was doing simultaneously.
Right, back down to Marseille.
In 1997, they released what is widely considered an absolute masterpiece, L'École du Micro d'Argent.
The School of the Silver Mic.
Beautifully translated. This album's legendary. It painted a sonic and lyrical picture of Marseille. It had these incredibly cinematic boom-bap beats, deeply weaving in those signature historical and philosophical themes.
And it was huge, wasn't it?
Massive critical and cultural success. It proved that French hip-hop could be deeply intellectual while still commanding a huge commercial appeal.
When you look at these 90s masterpieces side by side, it's just incredible. But I want to move beyond just the critical acclaim for a second.
Okay.
What did this actually mean for the people living in these neighborhoods?
I want you, the listener, to consider that exact question right now. Put yourself in the shoes of a young person living in a low-income housing project in the Paris suburbs. or in a marginalized neighborhood in Marseille in the mid-1990s.
Just really picture that reality.
For your entire life, you have felt completely ignored by mainstream French society. You don't see yourself on television, the politicians don't speak to you, the traditional media either ignores you entirely or vilifies your neighborhood.
You're invisible.
You're invisible. And then suddenly you hear your daily struggles, your specific reality, and your neighborhood's unique slang broadcast loudly and brilliantly on major culturally defining records.
It validates their existence.
It does. It tells them your story matters enough to be art. It takes this profound sense of isolation and transforms it into a shared, powerful cultural identity.
And because the art was so undeniable, it just couldn't stay underground forever.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we move into the 2000s, and this is the era of massive commercialization.
The floodgates opened.
French hip-hop literally breaks down the doors of the mainstream.
It's the classic trajectory of a counterculture becoming the dominant culture. The 2000s saw French hip-hop explode into the commercial market.
Big time.
We're talking massive physical CD sales. Heavy, constant rotation on mainstream radio and national television networks. It wasn't just a subculture anymore. It was driving the French music industry.
But I want to push back on that a bit.
Good.
Usually when a gritty street culture hits national television, it gets watered down. The edges get sanded off for the mass market. Did that happen here? Did the mainstream commodify the rebellion?
That is always the danger. And while there was certainly some pop rap that emerged, what is remarkable about the French scene is that commercial success didn't entirely homogenize the sound.
It didn't ruin it. Not at all. Instead, the influx of resources actually allowed distinct regional flavors to solidify and mature. It wasn't just a binary between Paris and Marseille anymore. The landscape fractured into these highly specific, hyperlocal sounds.
The source gives us a really detailed regional map of how the rap scene evolved in the 2000s. Let's break that down. Because it's not just about geography, it's about sonic identity.
Let's trace the map.
First, you have the Paris suburbs. This area largely maintained that strong, aggressive street feel and heavy social critique. It's the direct lineage of NTM.
Carried on by a new generation.
Right. Artists like Roth, who debuted in 1995 but released a socially critical powerhouse album, La Vie avant l'amour, in 2001.
A classic.
And then La Fouine, who debuted in 2005, really reflected the evolving culture of those suburbs for a new decade.
Then, if you travel down south to Marseille, the sound continued to evolve its unique coastal identity. Artists there began heavily integrating African and Caribbean musical influences into their beats.
A warmer sound.
You hear sunnier, more rhythmic polyrhythms paired with those deeply philosophical or sometimes highly party-centric lyrics. This is the legacy of IAM, paving the way for massive contemporary stars like Julol and Soprano.
They really embraced that cross-cultural melodic sound.
They absolutely did.
And it didn't stop there. The source notes that a city like Lyon leaned into something totally different. The scene there embraced highly experimental beats, fusing hip-hop with live instrumentation, jazz, and funk.
It's a much more organic, groove-based sound.
Which you see with collectives like L'Entourage.
And we absolutely cannot forget northern France.
Right, the North.
The geography and economy of the North are so different, and the music reflects that perfectly. Artists from the North focus their lyrics on the unique social problems and harsh realities of industrial cities facing severe economic decline.
It's a colder, more metallic, working-class grit.
Exactly. Artists like Fianso and Kerry James became the definitive voices of that specific regional struggle.
It's basically a sonic tapestry of the country's sociological makeup. And we have to highlight one absolute icon who dominated the 2000s landscape.
Booba.
Booba. He debuted in 1999 and dropped the landmark album Temps Mort in 2002. How did his sound shift the paradigm?
Booba is a fascinating figure. Temps Mort brought an incredibly dark, looming, heavy bass street rap style. He proved that you could achieve massive, unprecedented commercial success without losing the hyper-local, aggressive flavor of the streets.
He didn't compromise.
No. He didn't conform to the radio. He forced the radio to conform to his sound.
He brought the absolute heaviest beats and still went multi-platinum, but the music industry never stopped shifting.
It never does.
And the technology was about to change the rules of the game all over again. Which brings us to the 2010s to the present day. We transition from physical CDs and radio gatekeepers to smartphones, streaming algorithms, and a sound that goes truly global.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the 2010s completely redefined both the sonic boundaries and the distribution models of French hip-hop. There were two major shifts. First, Musically, the genre began heavily fusing with global sounds. We start hearing the integration of trap music, that rapid-fire hi-hat and booming 808 bass sound from the American South.
Right, that took over everywhere.
It really did. We also hear the frantic 140 beat per minute energy of UK grime. And crucially, we hear the syncopated, danceable rhythms of Afrobeat. French hip-hop became an incredible global melting pot.
And the second shift was purely logistical, the explosion of social media and YouTube.
Exactly, the democratization of distribution. A completely new generation of rappers realized they could bypass traditional record labels, radio programmers, and gatekeepers entirely.
They didn't need permission anymore.
None. They could rise up completely independently just by building a direct connection with their audience online.
You didn't need an A&R executive, you just needed a viral video and a Wi-Fi connection. And the new vanguard of artists that emerged from this digital era are massive.
Huge global stars.
The source gives us some prime examples that perfectly illustrate this new landscape. Look at the duo PNL, which stands for Peace and Loves. They had a huge breakout album in 2015, but their sound is nothing like the aggressive boom bap of the 90s.
PNL is the perfect example of the digital era's innovation. They are famous for what's often called cloud rap.
Cloud rap.
Yes. They use these independent, spacey, incredibly atmospheric beats. They rely heavily on auto-tune, not just for pitch correction, but as an emotional instrument.
It's almost ethereal.
It is. They explore traditional themes of urban culture and street life, but they do it with this deeply melancholic, almost cinematic vulnerability. It's an atmospheric contrast to the harsh realities they are rapping about.
It's haunting, really. Then you have an artist like Damso. He's actually a Belgian artist, which just goes to show how the francophone scene was rapidly expanding beyond France's physical borders.
A true international scene.
Damso became incredibly successful by blending very heavy, complex, and sometimes brutal social themes with these deeply introspective love songs. It's a highly nuanced, emotionally complex approach to the genre.
And contrasting that entirely, you have Niska. He brought this ferocious, high-energy trap style, characterized by aggressive ad-libs and infectious energy, but paired it directly with a very specific representation of the Paris suburbs.
The sheer variety is wild, but what's truly mind-blowing about this modern era is the international reach. The column emphasizes how French hip-hop has entirely broken out of Europe.
It's everywhere now.
It is finding massive, unprecedented popularity across the international market, and particularly in Francophone Africa.
That is perhaps the most beautiful part of this evolution. You have this cultural feedback loop being created between the continents.
A feedback loop.
Yeah, the music incorporates African rhythms, it travels back to Africa, it influences a new generation of artists there who then innovate and send new sounds back to France. It's a dynamic cross-continental dialogue.
So what does this all mean? When we zoom out and look back at the entire timeline provided by the MMR column, the cultural legacy is staggering.
It's so much bigger than music.
French hip-hop is no longer just a music genre. It is an enduring symbol of urban culture and a genuine social movement. It accomplished its primary organic mission. It gave a loud, undeniable, and permanent voice to marginalized youth.
It forced society to pay attention.
And its influence hasn't just stayed in the recording studio or on Spotify playlists. The source notes that this culture has spilled over and fundamentally shaped film, literature, fashion, and even the language of advertising across the entire French-speaking world. It literally changed the vocabulary of the culture.
It fundamentally altered the DNA of modern French society.
Yeah.
It forced the center to listen to the margins. But as we reflect on this incredible journey from the underground parks of Paris to the global mainstream, this raises an important question.
The floor is yours. Give us something to think about.
As French hip-hop continues to commercialize at lightning speed, as it continues to go global and blend seamlessly with massive international genres like Afrobeat and trap, how can the genre maintain that raw, localized, and historically deep-rooted voice?
That's the challenge.
Exactly. The exact voice that groups like NTM and IAM fought so incredibly hard to establish back in the late 80s and 90s. Will the hyper-local, gritty street stories of places like Marseille and Saint-Denis eventually be smoothed out and lost to the demands of a global streaming algorithm that favors easy listening? Or, conversely, will the borderless nature of the internet allow those specific hyper-local stories to resonate even louder, finding empathy and connection with listeners globally who recognize their own struggles in those French lyrics?
That is such a compelling thought to leave on. Does the algorithm dilute the truth to make it palatable, or does it amplify it to the world? A huge thank you to you for joining us on this deep dive today.
Thanks for tuning in.
We hope you walk away with a newfound appreciation for the incredible history, the sonic diversity, and the sheer power of French hip hop. Until next time, keep digging deeper, keep asking questions, and keep listening.